How do we honor the people who have left this earth? How do we make sure that we honor this? We can do it with tombstones, or scattering ashes, or sharing pictures and memories. But to truly honor someone, we must acknowledge the lives that they led. We must lift up their values, reflect on their journeys, and celebrate their stories. Through us, the living, trans voices that have been silenced can be amplified. But first, we must listen to those voices and hear their struggle. We must acknowledge their courage to live fully despite the consequences of doing so. And we must recognize the role that each of us plays in their oppression. If we live out values that celebrate their lives, we can help break down the stigma surrounding their existence. Be it harassment or laws or murder, there's an army of people who are trying to erase the trans community. And everyone in this room has the ability to make sure that we are seen and understood. For the most part, victims of transphobic violence are women, specifically women of color. In fact, the average life expectancy for trans women of color is 35 years, primarily as a result of violence. That's how old I am right now. And though yes, I do have my own fears about being a victim, I got to transition into a white man, the most privileged type of person in this world. So my pain and my story and my struggle are invisible to other people, which means my experiences of being vulnerable are much less than many of my trans sisters. Scholar and LGBTQ activist Sarah Lamble states that our task is to move from sympathy to responsibility, from complicity to reflexivity, from witnessing to action. It is not enough to simply honor the memory of the dead. We must transform the practices of the living. The experiences of the trans woman of color is not only the struggle to live a life of authenticity in a world full of boxes, is to do so alongside the imminent threat of violence against women and the oppressive racism that has a hold on our society and structures. If we can recognize the strife of all those oppressed and remember that we are a part and remember that we are a part of an interconnected web, then we'll conclude that there cannot be peace for one group without peace for all. And trans women are singled out in part because it's much more difficult to them to pass. Passing means fitting into the box of gender that we as a culture are comfortable with. It means being able to move through society without being seen as different. And you might ask, well, why is it so much harder for trans women to pass? One of my theories is that it's much easier to add than to take away. So for instance, it's easier to start hair growth, like this, than to eliminate it. It's much easier to grow broad shoulders than it is to narrow them. I can buy shoes that make my feet look bigger, but a trans woman can't shrink hers. Trans people undergo a multitude of surgeries in order for their bodies to represent their gender. But I think it's important that I make the point that not all trans people can or will take those steps. And this doesn't weaken their gender identity. It just makes them more noticeable to everyone else. It's a bittersweet feeling for me personally to finally feel like I am myself, yet simultaneously feel an incredible amount of guilt for the privilege I transitioned into. And there's a lot we can do with feelings of guilt, right? We can dwell on them, we can feel sad, we can ignore them, or we can take action to ease the trans experience for future generations. Your first step in bettering the trans experience is to educate yourself. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to explore something that seems foreign, because the less this world sees the trans community as foreign, the more welcome we will be in the larger web of society. I was born with female organs. My mom loves to tell the story how in the hospital, all the nurses would put pretty little bows in my hair. But as I aged and I grew my tiny muscles, it became increasingly difficult for my parents to put me in a dress. My poor father had to go to work many mornings with claw marks on his face. And you'd think, give up, let the kid wear what they want. But my parents were only human, and they were a part of society that was complicit to the strict gender stereotypes that still wreak havoc on us today. As a kid, I was a really awesome baseball player, way better than most of my male teammates. When I attempted to join the school team, I was directly told I was not welcome. I wasn't allowed on a boys' team, yet so often I was called he or young man by strangers. It was really confusing. I remember one day walking out of the girls' bathroom. I think I was 11, I had a bowl cut, I had baggy clothes on, and I was immediately pushed up against the wall and scolded by a teacher. "What are you doing in there?" I was going to the bathroom. He put the pieces together quickly enough and he let me go. In all things considered, these events were minor, but they marked times that it was drilled into my head that by me being myself, I didn't belong anywhere. For most people who are trans, they're taught from a young age that they should not be themselves if they want to fit in. Their spirits are not celebrated. We are shamed, abused, ridiculed. We are silenced. All in an attempt to erase our identities in order to make everyone else feel comfortable because they're unwilling to think beyond what they know. Recent studies by the Human Rights Campaign report that close to half of trans youth have attempted suicide. You see, sometimes courage is just too hard to come by. People within the trans community need support. If the concept of the trans experience seems confusing to you, that's because it is. Especially when you're trying to wrap your head around it happening in your own body. Trans people need to know that you don't think that they're freaks. Because too often we get the message that we're abominations or that there's something wrong with us. We need to be celebrated. And look, that's just some of the sad stuff. There's also an amazingly beautiful side to transitioning, and I definitely don't want you to think that it's all negative. In fact, I hope that it can be inspiring, and I urge you to question, do my actions and the way I present myself in this world reflect who I truly am? When you know you're living life for yourself and showing the world who you are, regardless of the consequences, there's a pride, a confidence that energizes and empowers you. But even with the vast array of positives that come along with transitioning, words and laws and violence still hurt. And when it feels like so much of the world is disgusted by you, it's difficult to believe that you are deserving of love. I think we as a people often forget the impact our love has on others. Celebrating the differences that we have strengthens our confidence and makes us brave. When members of our congregation marched together at the Pride Parade, there was this amazing surge of energy, this feeling of love and support and celebration that just blanketed us. But what many of you might not know is the actual history of the Pride Parade. You see, it used to be illegal for a man to dress as a woman. When a surprise raid on the Stonewall Inn took place in June of 1969, police officers took anyone that was dressed as a woman into the bathroom to verify their sex, arresting anyone with male anatomy. The entire situation was gross and invasive, and it led to 3 days of rioting. Almost 50 years later, those riots by the transgender and gender nonconforming community are the reason why we celebrate Pride across the nation. But once the parades and parties are over, and the banners and signs are recycled, the trans voice is once again lost in the shuffle of the gay rights movement. When it comes to rights and freedoms, many trans people feel we are at the bottom of the barrel in the LGBTQ community. And now, as many of you know, the current administration wants to erase us by narrowly defining gender as a biological and unchangeable condition determined by genitalia at birth. It is by far the most drastic move yet in a government-wide effort to roll back recognition and protections of transgender people under federal civil rights laws. For the last year, the Department of Health and Human Services has argued that the Obama administration wrongfully extended civil rights protections to people who should not have them. Wrongfully extended civil rights protections to people who should not have them. They're attempting to erase us as beings of worth and dignity. Our battles are far from over on so many levels. When I came to this congregation, I looked and I sounded much different than I do today. And I remember sitting down with Reverend Sarah, and I came out to her, and after acknowledging how huge of a thing that was, she said to me, "If you're looking for a community that will accept you and love you and support you through this, you found it." And she was right. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about keeping this congregation strong. Not because I owe anything, but because I want us to be that for more people. I want the people beyond our walls who are struggling to know that this is the place they can come when they're alone, when they're scared, when they need a foundation to grow from. But beyond welcoming the trans community, how can this congregation actually honor trans lives, and what does it look like? Is it a workshop? Is it donations? Is it marching at Pride? Sure. But more importantly, we need to first reflect on our own uncomfortableness and fix our own lack of knowledge. Then we go and spread that out to the world. Our OWL program is a great start, but we know every kid is in this program. One way to impact all children, and most adults, is to resist feeding the strict gender norms of our society. I recently heard about this new movement where people are raising their kids genderless and calling them babies. and I laughed, and then I kind of shook my head thinking of someone saying, well, what gifts am I going to buy them? As if someone's sex defines whether or not they like Tonka trucks or pink ponies. These boxes of gender have been developed through thousands of years of tradition. But as we humans evolve into a more enlightened society of truth and acceptance, many of our traditions need to be reevaluated. I distinctly remember one day sitting on the floor with my patient wife listening to me. I remember saying, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a freak. I don't want to put my body through this. I don't want to cause chaos and awkwardness with my friends and family. I don't want the world to hate me. I don't want to die. But the fact was that I also wanted to be living a life of honesty. I wanted to live to my fullest potential. Isn't that one of the reasons why we all gather here together? I had a choice to live a lie, or I could choose to be authentic. I chose to be courageous because the consequences otherwise were not something that I could live with. Not as someone who was trying to seek their true nature. We as UUs promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. It's our fourth principle. We as a congregation celebrate that concept. And the important thing to remember is that the trans people who have been murdered died living out their journeys, doing their very best to show their true colors. The same way that we as UUs push for one another to grow is exactly what folks in the trans community are all about. It takes courage to take risks, and it takes courage to reflect on our own ignorance. And the consequences of doing that might be painful, and it will absolutely be uncomfortable, but the consequences are also positive. And though I think most of you here understand that, I know for a fact that there is still awkwardness. At our recent Beyond Categorical Thinking workshop, we learned that it's not abnormal, even in our liberal faith, for congregations to feel uncomfortable with calling a transgender minister. And of course, after this topic came up, some folks knew that I was personally shaken, and the common statement was, well, I think it would be more about trans women. And that was a really nice gesture, thank you, but it didn't make me do it. It made me realize that we as a congregation have work to do. I reflected on it a lot. So people don't see me as trans, so my leadership role doesn't bother them. Therefore, I have to conclude that it's being aware of someone being trans that causes the uncomfortableness. The fact that people have to face such an obvious difference triggers the issue. So why would that happen? At a place like this, where we all know that hate and bigotry have no home, I have to guess that the awkwardness must come from our lack of understanding. Instead of seeing a non-passing trans person for who they are, all that's seen is the fact that they're trans. And folks are then distracted by their own ignorance and worry about saying something inappropriate. And I understand that sometimes we make mistakes. We mess up pronouns, or we make stereotypical assumptions. And yeah, that might make us feel bad. And I say us because even I make mistakes. But it's so important that we try to get this right. By dishonoring something as simple as pronouns, we are unconsciously erasing trans identities. Too often in life, we turn away because it's just too inconvenient to try to wrap our heads around something new. But I have to ask, is putting our own comfort and ease of experience in front of another human being's basic right to worth and dignity in line with our UU values? It is exhausting as a trans person to constantly have to be worried about making other people feel comfortable. If we turn our backs on someone or something because we're uncomfortable with taking risks to learn more, if we don't have the courage to move beyond our current state, if we don't have the courage to grow individually and as a community, how will we ever have a chance to overcome obstacles and become all that we can be as people and as a congregation? How can we ever connect deeply and openly if we neglect to listen to everyone's story? I am trans, and I am proud of it, and I wasn't always proud of it. That took a lot of growth. But by being proud and by not hiding behind privilege, myself and everyone in this room can help make the list of names honored each year on Transgender Day of Remembrance a little bit shorter. Life is complex. It's an endless book of decisions and discovery. Have you ever had a decision to make, and you know in your head and your heart what the right thing to do was, but the consequences of doing it were just so intense? And you walked away and you ignored it? Well, every time you meet or hear about a trans person, know that they did not walk away. They faced their challenge, and they faced the challenge and were put into a circumstance that they had no control over, and with courage, they forged ahead, accepting both the terrifying and the life-giving consequences. Please rise and body your spirit and join together in singing True Colors, which is an insert.